My boss stole my work, my dreams, and years of my life. But I found a way to take it all back. I still remember the day I got my first real job. I was fresh out of college, full of ideas that I thought could change the world, or at least change the industry I was stepping into. I had spent years dreaming, planning, and obsessing over one project in particular, a software platform I was convinced could revolutionize the way companies managed their workflow. Every line of code, every flowchart, every feature idea had come from me. I was proud of it, terrified of it, and deeply, irrationally in love with it. When I walked into my new office on the first day, I felt like I had arrived somewhere I belonged. My boss, Andrew, was a tall man with an easy smile and a way of making you feel like your ideas mattered. "People like you don't come around often," he said, shaking my hand. I believed him. I handed him a prototype of my project, fully expecting him to offer advice, maybe point out some flaws, but instead, he just smiled and nodded. He said, "This is impressive. Keep going." Those first few months were exhilarating. Every morning, I'd come in early, heart racing with excitement, and stay late into the night, coding, sketching, and brainstorming. I didn't care about weekends or birthdays. I barely even noticed that I had a life outside of work. I was building my dream, and it felt like Andrew was my ally, cheering me on, listening to every idea I pitched. But small things started to creep in, subtle enough that I questioned myself before I questioned him. During meetings, he'd repeat an idea I had suggested as if it were his own. He'd say, "I was thinking we could try this," and suddenly my concept was framed in his voice. I told myself I was imagining it. Surely, he was just building on my work, right? Then came the emails. Little comments that made me pause. "This is a nice direction, perhaps we can adjust it slightly." And yet, when I looked at the actual product being presented, it wasn't adjusted, it was identical to what I had spent weeks perfecting. My heart sank more than once, but I pushed it down. I had to trust him, I told myself. He's my boss. He's supposed to guide me. And then the first real shock hit. It was during a mid-quarter review. Andrew presented my prototype to a group of senior executives. I sat in the corner, quietly listening as my own ideas were explained with the confidence and authority of someone who had never spent a sleepless night writing them. When the applause came, I froze. I was invisible. My voice didn't exist in that room, even though every idea on the screen had been mine. That night, I sat at my apartment desk, staring at lines of code, questioning my judgment, and, for the first time, doubting myself. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew I wasn't wrong. Something inside me was screaming that my trust had been misplaced. And yet, I didn't quit. Not then. I couldn't. Part of me wanted to run, but another part, some stubborn, angry part, refused to let him win. I decided to fight in my own way. Quietly, meticulously. I started documenting everything. Every email, every file timestamp, every version of my prototype. I began to understand that I was gathering armor. Every piece of evidence was a small brick in the wall I was building to protect myself, and eventually, to reclaim what was mine. I couldn't confront him yet, not openly. That would be too risky. For now, I would observe, I would collect, and I would wait. The paranoia was exhausting. I double-checked every line of code, every idea I pitched, every document I shared. I began carrying a notepad everywhere, recording details I once would have dismissed as trivial. At first, it felt absurd. Me, the loyal, hardworking employee, reduced to a private investigator in my own office. But as weeks passed, I realized it wasn't absurd at all, it was survival. Every evening, as I walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, I rehearsed the confrontation in my head. What would I say if someone stole my work again? How could I prove that this project, the product of years of my life, wasn't just inspired by me, it was mine? I felt like a chess player anticipating moves far in advance, while Andrew walked freely, unaware that a storm was quietly forming around him. The thing about betrayal is that it sneaks up on you. One day, you're collaborating with someone you trust. The next, you realize that trust has been used as a weapon against you. And yet, in that realization, there is also power, quiet, simmering power. I had proof, I had talent, and, most importantly, I had resolve. And I wasn't going to waste it. By the end of that first intense year, I had learned one vital truth: ambition alone isn't enough. Vision alone isn't enough. You need vigilance, strategy, and the courage to fight for your own life's work. Andrew thought he could take everything from me because he underestimated the quiet persistence of someone who refuses to lose. He didn't know I was just getting started. The weeks following that mid-quarter presentation were a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Every time I entered the office, I felt like a ghost haunting my own ideas. Andrew's smile remained unchanged, confident, untouchable. He didn't even flinch when I approached him with questions or suggestions. To the outside world, we were a seamless team. But behind the polished meetings and friendly jokes, I was unraveling. It started subtly. My name appeared less frequently in emails. Credit for contributions was quietly redirected. During a brainstorming session, I suggested a feature that I had designed months ago. Andrew nodded politely, then later, in front of the team, described the idea as something I had been considering for a while. A quiet knot formed in my stomach. My work was alive, but I was slowly being erased from it. At home, I replayed the meetings over and over. Each sentence he said, each acknowledgement that never came to me, each laugh at a joke I didn't make, it all built into a story I didn't want to believe. I was being stolen from, systematically. My dreams, my long nights of coding, my sacrifice, it was all being siphoned away while I clutched the remnants. I tried confronting him once, in private, my hands shaking. Andrew. I don't think this is fair. That feature, that design, it was my work, I said carefully. He leaned back in his chair, exuding calm, and smiled. Don't be silly. I'm just building on your ideas. You'll get credit eventually. The words were hollow, a thin veneer over a reality I already knew. I left the office that day feeling smaller, defeated, and more determined than ever. I began to notice other signs, subtle, almost invisible at first. Files on shared drives were duplicated and renamed. Minor edits to my code appeared without my knowledge. Meeting notes referenced Andrew's vision, even when I had drafted every slide. Colleagues, some friendly, some indifferent, either didn't notice or chose not to notice. I felt trapped in a web I hadn't seen being spun. That's when the paranoia began. I started reviewing emails multiple times a day. I saved every version of every document I worked on, dating and timestamping them meticulously. Every piece of evidence became a small anchor for my sanity. I began carrying a notebook to track conversations and decisions. My home became a war room, my life outside of work faded further into shadows. Friends noticed, but I brushed off their concerns. I couldn't risk distractions, not now. Then came the client calls. Andrew would present ideas that were unmistakably mine, to clients I had nurtured relationships with, and watched them nod and agree. They trusted him, of course, they had no idea the work they were praising was stolen. One afternoon, I received an email from a client asking for clarification on a feature Andrew had developed. I stared at the screen, stomach churning. Every nerve in my body screamed. The betrayal was tangible, almost physical. One evening, after another exhausting day of watching him take credit, I sat alone in the office. The hum of fluorescent lights and the faint tapping of keyboards were deafening. I opened my notebook and wrote, "I will not let this define me. I will not let him take everything." That sentence became my mantra. I realized that to reclaim my life and my work, I needed a plan, not just anger, not just confrontation, but strategy. I began observing him more closely. Andrew was arrogant, meticulous, and careless in ways that I could exploit. He had patterns. He left his office unlocked at predictable times. He emailed drafts without checking the metadata. He trusted appearances over substance, charm over scrutiny. Slowly, I began mapping out a method, piece by piece, like assembling a puzzle. Meanwhile, the toll on my mental health was severe. Sleep became scarce. I started experiencing nightmares where Andrew replaced my face with his, taking everything from me and leaving me invisible. Every morning, I forced myself to work, to be productive, to maintain the facade of calm. Inside, however, a storm raged. I felt isolated, angry, humiliated, and yet, alive with the need to fight back. I confided in one colleague, cautiously. "I think Andrew is taking credit for my work," I said one morning, voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, a mixture of sympathy and fear. "Be careful," she warned. "He's dangerous in ways you don't see." Her words stayed with me. Dangerous, yes, but not invincible. That became my next thought. If he was careless, I could turn his arrogance against him. I created a system to track every contribution I made. Files were time-stamped, emails meticulously saved, prototypes backed up on secure drives. Every interaction, every idea, every small detail became a piece of armor. I started connecting dots, tracing the theft of my work in patterns that became increasingly undeniable. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of control. I wasn't powerless. Months went by, and the pattern continued. Andrew presented my ideas at conferences, to clients, even in internal award ceremonies. He basked in the praise, and I silently counted every stolen moment, every stolen idea, every stolen dream. But with each theft, I grew more focused. My anger was no longer a destructive force, it became fuel. I stopped asking myself whether I could beat him and started asking how. One night, I stayed until the office was empty. I reviewed every email, every file, every draft. The evidence was overwhelming. I could see the full scope of the theft, laid bare in black and white. And I knew, finally, that confrontation without proof would be meaningless. I needed everything documented, irrefutable, and undeniable. By the end of that year, my plan had formed. Andrew thought he had control, but the quiet war had already begun. I wasn't just going to reclaim my work, I was going to reclaim my life, my career, and my dignity. And this time, I wouldn't leave anything to chance. The day of the big client presentation arrived like a storm I had been bracing for months. I could feel the tension in the air as I walked into the conference room, a sense of déjà vu washing over me. Every face I saw, the clients, my colleagues, even Andrew's own team, was about to witness the culmination of my work, presented as if it were someone else's. I tried to focus, to steady my breathing, but the pit in my stomach refused to ease. Andrew was in his element. He stood at the front, projecting confidence, charm, and authority. "We've developed a groundbreaking solution that will revolutionize workflow management," he said, gesturing to the slides. I watched, frozen, as my designs, my code, my countless nights of meticulous work flashed across the screen. Every innovation, every feature, every detail was mine. Mine. And yet, it was his. The clients nodded enthusiastically, asking questions that I had already answered in earlier prototypes. Andrew answered them with ease, never faltering, never acknowledging that I had created the solution he now claimed. I could feel the heat rising in my face, my hands trembling. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to claim what was mine, but I knew that would only make me look unprofessional, desperate, weak. I sank into my chair, heart pounding, and for a moment, I let despair wash over me. This was it. All those years of effort, all those sleepless nights, all my sacrifices, it had all been stolen. I had nothing to show for it. Andrew had taken not only my work but also my recognition, my credibility, and my dreams. And yet, amidst the humiliation, a strange clarity emerged. I realized that this was not the end, it was the tipping point. I would not let him win completely. The war I had been quietly waging was about to enter its decisive phase. After the presentation, I retreated to my office, shutting the door and letting the weight of the day settle around me. I pulled out my notebook and my meticulously organized files. Every email, every draft, every prototype, every proof of my contributions, was there, waiting. I began reviewing them systematically, ensuring that nothing could be disputed. If Andrew thought he had erased me, he was wrong. The next days were a careful balance of observation and preparation. I monitored Andrew's interactions with clients and colleagues, noting every misstep, every overconfident claim, every small arrogance he displayed. The more I watched, the more I saw patterns, predictable behaviors, overlooked details, and tiny weaknesses that could be exploited. It was as if the more he flaunted my work, the more he revealed his own vulnerability. But the psychological toll was immense. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, and every casual remark from a colleague felt like a potential trap. I started seeing Andrew in my dreams, smiling, taking credit, walking away unscathed. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling both rage and despair. Yet, in those same dreams, I also rehearsed my victory, testing strategies, imagining the moment when justice would finally prevail. Then came the critical breakthrough. While cross-referencing timestamps and file histories, I discovered something I hadn't noticed before. Andrew had carelessly left his edits in the original versions of my files. Metadata, hidden notes, and revision logs all pointed directly to me as the creator. The evidence was irrefutable. I realized, with a mix of relief and exhilaration, that the moment I had been waiting for was finally approaching. I approached a trusted mentor, someone who had witnessed my dedication from the beginning. I laid out everything: the theft, the manipulated presentations, the stolen prototypes, and the meticulously documented evidence. Her eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed in determination. "You have him," she said quietly. "Now you just have to execute." Execution meant patience. I couldn't rush. I couldn't let Andrew sense my next move. Every interaction became a calculated step: polite questions, subtle corrections, careful gathering of additional proof. I watched him grow complacent, arrogant, and careless, just as I had predicted. His confidence, once intimidating, became his greatest vulnerability. The day finally came when I presented my evidence to HR. I walked in, calm but resolute, and laid everything on the table: emails, timestamps, prototypes, and detailed logs of his misappropriation. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in Andrew's eyes. The charm and confidence were gone, replaced by a sudden recognition that he had underestimated me. HR's response was deliberate, professional, and thorough. Investigations were launched, clients were notified, and the truth could no longer be denied. My project, the product of years of my labor, was officially recognized as my intellectual property. Andrew's name, once shining in praise, began to fade in comparison to mine. But the most satisfying part wasn't the official recognition. It was the quiet, personal victory. Walking through the office after the announcement, I noticed colleagues approaching me, some with apologies, some with admiration, all acknowledging the truth. The invisible weight that had crushed me for so long began to lift, replaced by a steady, resilient sense of self. That night, I stayed late in the office, alone. I opened my laptop and stared at the project that had caused me so much pain, yet now symbolized triumph. The long, harrowing journey, from trust to betrayal, from despair to strategy, had finally reached its climax. I wasn't just reclaiming my work, I was reclaiming myself. And I realized something profound: betrayal could take years of my life, but it could never take my determination, my creativity, or my story. Andrew had thought he could steal my dreams, but in doing so, he had only sharpened my resolve. I had fought back, and I had won, not with rage, not with chaos, but with clarity, patience, and unshakable persistence. After the crushing betrayal during that client presentation, I knew I couldn't confront Andrew openly yet. I needed more than just anger, I needed a plan. And not just a casual plan, I needed something meticulous, unassailable, and airtight. The first step was to map everything he had taken. I spent hours cross-referencing old emails, file versions, and prototypes. Each project milestone became a piece of the puzzle. My workspace transformed into a miniature war room: sticky notes, spreadsheets, and digital backups lined every surface. Every detail, no matter how small, was catalogued. I labeled them with dates, times, and descriptions. This wasn't just documentation, it was armor. I realized that evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Andrew was persuasive, charming, and used to getting his way. I needed allies. Carefully, I began talking to a few trusted colleagues, testing the waters. I didn't disclose everything, too risky, but I gauged reactions, observed loyalties, and quietly recruited support. Some people were skeptical, some afraid, but a few shared my observations. Every shared insight was a weapon in the making. Meanwhile, I had to understand Andrew completely, his patterns, his weaknesses, his arrogance. He trusted appearances, relied heavily on charm, and often bypassed due diligence, assuming no one was scrutinizing him. I watched him closely, noting the times he left files unsecured, the emails he neglected to double-check, and the subtle ways he presented my work as his own without thinking anyone would notice. I also dug deeper into digital trails. Every revision, every metadata record, every backup copy of my files became a piece of evidence. At first, it felt obsessive, almost paranoid. I spent nights poring over timestamps, documenting changes he had made without authorization. But soon, I realized the obsession was necessary. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. The more thorough I was, the stronger my case would be. The hardest part was balancing this with my daily responsibilities. Andrew maintained his persona flawlessly, expecting me to perform without complaint. Each interaction was a careful dance. I smiled when I needed to, asked polite questions, and offered assistance, all while quietly collecting ammunition for my plan. Some days, the weight of it felt unbearable. I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. Could I actually expose him without ruining my own career? But the answer was clear: if I didn't act, I would lose everything. Step by step, I built my case. I saved emails where I had pitched ideas, noting who was copied and when they were sent. I compared prototypes and drafts, highlighting revisions he had made while pretending they were his own. I even noted verbal acknowledgments from meetings where he had repeated my ideas as if they were original. Every detail became a line in the story I would tell later, one that no one could deny. As the weeks passed, I began rehearsing the confrontation mentally. Not in anger, but in clarity. I imagined presenting my evidence, explaining the timeline, showing the irrefutable proof that he had stolen years of my work. Each rehearsal strengthened my resolve. I wasn't going to let emotion control me. This would be precise, deliberate, and devastatingly effective. Andrew remained oblivious, which only confirmed my strategy. He continued taking credit, confident in his untouchability. That arrogance was my ally. Every time he bragged, every time he presented my ideas as his own, he left behind traces, footprints in digital form that I could follow. He had underestimated me completely, and that was exactly what I needed. By now, my life outside work had faded almost entirely. Friends noticed my obsession, colleagues whispered about my intense focus, and yet I couldn't stop. Each late night spent cataloging evidence, each meticulous note, each cross-check of metadata, brought me closer to victory. My work had been stolen, but my determination had never been stronger. Then came the turning point. While reviewing a shared folder, I found an old draft that Andrew had edited without changing the metadata. It clearly identified me as the original author, and the changes he had made were minor at best. It was the smoking gun I had been searching for, the irrefutable proof that could not be contested. I could finally see the endgame. I shared the evidence with my mentor, a trusted advisor who had always believed in my abilities. She reviewed everything meticulously and nodded. "This is airtight," she said. "No one can deny this. You're ready." Her words were the confirmation I needed. After months of preparation, the plan was no longer theoretical, it was real. The final pieces fell into place over the next few days. I carefully prepared a presentation for HR, highlighting the timeline, the stolen work, and the irrefutable digital proof. I rehearsed my delivery repeatedly, ensuring that my tone was professional, calm, and precise. Anger would have been easy, clarity was far more powerful. The day I finally presented my case, I felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I walked into HR's office, laid out every file, every email, every piece of evidence. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of my stolen years lift slightly. I explained the timeline, showed how my work had been systematically appropriated, and detailed every instance where Andrew had claimed credit. As I spoke, I noticed Andrew's expression change. Confidence faltered. Arrogance cracked. He had thought he could take everything from me, and yet here I was, armed not with emotion but with proof. The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of the office outside. HR asked questions, verified facts, and began the investigation. Andrew's facade crumbled, and for the first time, I saw him unsure, exposed, and vulnerable. By the end of that day, I knew the tide had shifted. My work, my time, and my recognition were no longer in jeopardy. The months of careful preparation, observation, and strategic patience had finally paid off. Andrew could no longer claim my achievements. The evidence was too strong, too precise, too undeniable. And as I left the HR office that evening, I realized something profound. The process of reclaiming what was mine had not only restored my career, it had strengthened me in ways I hadn't imagined. I had endured betrayal, humiliation, and isolation, and emerged with clarity, resilience, and an unshakable sense of purpose. After presenting my evidence to HR, the days that followed were surreal. I had expected tension, perhaps confrontation, maybe even subtle retaliation from Andrew, but instead, the process unfolded with a strange precision. HR conducted interviews, examined timestamps, reviewed every email and file I had meticulously collected. The weight of anticipation pressed on me, but I had prepared for this. I had rehearsed every detail, every explanation. Andrew, for the first time, appeared unsettled. His confident smile, once a constant in the office, had faltered. He seemed almost human. I observed him closely during meetings, noting how carefully he spoke, how often he glanced at me, calculating and uncertain. He knew the walls were closing in. And I knew that patience, my greatest weapon, was finally yielding results. Clients began receiving clarifications about the origin of the work. I watched as Andrew's ownership of my project quietly unraveled. It was subtle at first, a polite correction here, an acknowledgement there, but it was enough to dismantle the illusion he had built. He had counted on charm and confidence to shield him, but those were no longer enough. Proof had replaced perception, and perception had been his strongest ally. Colleagues who had once ignored my complaints or whispered behind my back began to approach me cautiously. Some apologized for doubting me, some asked questions about the evidence, and a few quietly expressed admiration for the meticulous strategy one had employed. The power of preparation became evident, respect and recognition had returned, not through confrontation, but through undeniable facts. The official confirmation came 2 weeks later. HR called me in, their tone professional but warm. "The investigation is complete," they said. "The intellectual property in question is officially recognized as yours. All credit will be restored." Relief, satisfaction, and an almost euphoric sense of vindication washed over me. Years of stolen work, sleepless nights, and personal sacrifice had finally been acknowledged. Andrew was summoned separately. I didn't attend that meeting, but I heard through the grapevine how the encounter unfolded. His charm failed him, his defenses crumbled. HR presented the evidence clearly and decisively. He could not deny it. For the first time, he was confronted with the consequences of his arrogance. The office atmosphere shifted subtly in the days following. I was no longer invisible. My work, my dedication, and my ideas were recognized and celebrated. Clients acknowledged my contributions directly. Colleagues approached me for advice, mentorship, or collaboration. It was a quiet, vindicating reversal of fortune. The years I had feared lost were, in some sense, reclaimed through strategy, perseverance, and unshakable commitment to truth. Sitting at my desk one evening, I reflected on the journey. The anger that had driven me initially had transformed into a calm, deliberate focus. I had learned that justice is not always immediate, sometimes it is a process, painstaking and strategic. But when pursued with patience and precision, it is inevitable. I felt stronger, more resilient, and more capable than ever before. In the quiet moments, I thought about the years I had sacrificed, the moments of doubt, the sleepless nights. Could they have been avoided? Perhaps. But those experiences had forged a determination and clarity I could not have anticipated. I had faced betrayal, humiliation, and isolation, and emerged not broken, but empowered. With the recognition restored, I finally felt free to pursue my own path. I resigned from the company, not in anger, but with purpose. I launched my project under my own name, taking with me every lesson, every insight, and every hard-earned skill. The project that had once been hijacked now belonged to me fully, not just in ownership, but in spirit. Launching it independently was both terrifying and exhilarating. Every decision, every feature, every client interaction was mine to make. The sense of autonomy, of agency, was intoxicating. I realized that reclaiming my work had been only the first step. Reclaiming my life, my confidence, and my ability to trust myself was the real victory. Reflecting on everything, I understood a fundamental truth: people can try to steal your work, your recognition, and even your dreams, but they can never steal your persistence, your intellect, or your courage. The years that felt lost were transformed into fuel for growth and resilience. What I had feared was taken forever was, in reality, a lesson and a testament to my own strength. Andrew had underestimated me, as so many people had at one time or another. But in the end, the careful, relentless pursuit of truth and justice had exposed the illusion of his authority. I had faced betrayal, but I had turned it into triumph. And now, as I watched my project flourish under my own guidance, I knew that the struggle, the pain, and the meticulous planning had been worth it. I lost years to someone else's greed, but I found myself in the process. And now, nothing could stop me. The days after reclaiming my project felt almost unreal. I walked into the office one morning, and instead of dread, I felt anticipation. The air seemed different, lighter. Colleagues greeted me with genuine respect, and clients now addressed me directly for guidance and insight. For the first time in years, I felt seen, not as someone's shadow, not as an invisible worker, but as the creator and visionary I had always been. Andrew was gone shortly after the investigation concluded. HR reported that he had been removed from his position due to repeated violations of intellectual property ethics and professional misconduct. I didn't celebrate. There was no joy in watching someone fall, there was only relief, closure, and the quiet satisfaction that justice, in its slow but inevitable way, had been served. I spent the following weeks reflecting on the journey. Losing years of my life to someone else's greed had been devastating, but it had also taught me something invaluable: resilience, patience, and strategic thinking are far more powerful than immediate revenge or impulsive action. Every sleepless night, every ounce of stress, every moment of doubt had contributed to my growth. I had transformed the betrayal into experience, the theft into strategy, and the despair into determination. Launching my project independently was liberating. I had full control over every decision, every feature, and every client interaction. The project was no longer just work, it was a manifestation of my vision, my persistence, and my creative energy. The lessons I had learned from Andrew's betrayal, careful documentation, clear communication, and strategic foresight, were now tools I wielded with confidence. But beyond professional success, I discovered a deeper, more personal victory. I had learned to trust myself again. For years, I had questioned my judgment, my value, and my ability to succeed. Andrew's theft had amplified my self-doubt. Yet, by carefully reclaiming what was mine, I restored not only my work but also my belief in my own abilities. I realized that self-trust is the foundation of all achievement. Without it, even the most brilliant ideas can be lost. Friends and mentors who had watched my struggle were amazed by the turnaround. Some confessed they had feared I might quit entirely or abandon the project. But I had learned that endurance isn't just about surviving, it's about learning, observing, and acting with precision when the moment is right. I had survived, yes, but I had also conquered. Even Andrew's downfall became a quiet reminder that arrogance and dishonesty are temporary shields. True skill, creativity, and integrity withstand scrutiny. While he had relied on charm and manipulation to claim credit, I had relied on evidence, patience, and unwavering focus. The contrast could not have been starker. As I worked late one night, finalizing features and preparing for client presentations under my own banner, I realized I no longer felt bitterness. The anger that had driven me was gone, replaced by calm, deliberate purpose. I had taken back what was mine, and I had done so on my own terms. The years lost to deceit had been reclaimed in knowledge, resilience, and mastery. I paused, looking at the project on my screen, imagining the future it could have. A sense of pride swelled within me. This was no longer just a professional victory, it was a personal triumph. I had endured betrayal, navigated injustice, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. And in that moment, I made a promise to myself: never again would I allow someone else's greed or ambition to overshadow my vision. My work, my ideas, and my dreams were mine to protect, nurture, and grow. Every lesson learned, every challenge overcome, had shaped me into someone who could not be defeated, not by others, and not by circumstance. I had lost years, yes, but I had gained clarity, resilience, and the unshakable confidence that comes from fighting for what is yours. And as the city lights glimmered outside my window, I smiled, knowing that the journey was far from over. My project, my dreams, and my life were finally, and irrevocably, my own. The past had tried to define me, but I had rewritten the story. And now, the future was mine.